Hey guys, DPS Bodafet. Today I want to talk about increasing your DPS. And pretty much I've spent the last couple of weeks really trying to increase my DPS for raids because, obviously you need good DPS for raids. But I've kind of maxed out my stats. So I had to turn to other ways of increasing my DPS. And actually one of the things that really does increase your DPS like the most is just being comfortable in a fight to always be within attack range, because when you see a lot of people do a fight for the first time, usually tweaking, and they do dodges that they shouldn't be, or they'll probably sidestep to a different position where it's a weird angle and they can't get all their abilities, which you shouldn't be doing. And once you get used to a fight, usually you can just apply DPS 100% of the time and dodge every ability because you're just so used to it, to that fight. And so that's what I thought, like one of the biggest factors for DPS is just how used you are to the fight, the mechanics that you bring to the fight. And boom, I am now the Pope. Yay, I'm the Pope. Yeah, get on this railing. Boom, 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 boom. Hear ye, citizens of Nexus, I am Pope Bodofet the Third. The other two never were born, but I plan for the future. And I am the future third. Yeah. Well. Okay. Let's talk about DPS. Oh, I gotta face my guy this way. All epic like. So, the basic way to increase your DPS is just by increasing your stats. So, assault power, mainly. Some crit too, need some crit, and your strike through. All these three things factor into your DPS. But when you've kind of felt like you've hit that mark where really the only good gear that you can get to increase your DPS is coming out of really low dropped gear, well, that's when you have to look in a different direction to increase your DPS. And all the ways you increase your DPS is somehow farming to get a really good gear drop, or really looking for gear with specific rune slots. That way you can increase your DPS that way through your runes, which is a very usually the next step most people take in decreasing their DPS is through rune slots. But there's two other ways that you can increase your DPS even more, and I consider it that it's a more significant increase than actually your base stats and your rune slots. And I'm going to tell you why in a bit. But the one thing I want to talk about is the the ideal of DPS. In DPS, there's two things that contribute to your DPS, and one of two things is your gear level, or stats on your gear, like how good your gear is, and individual skill. So you can have a really high gear level and have really bad skill, but because you're pulling those numbers from the high gear level, it can compensate and make you look like you're an average player. So one of the things that really top very top rating guilds usually have the best gear, and what really decides who's in and who's out is just how well you can avoid red mechanics, damage, who can always think on their toes and adapt the most. And that's why usually the top of the world top guilds and the players within them usually can do a boss the first time without wiping it, because the all are so used to working with each other, and they're playing on such a higher level than other players, that when they see something they can quickly adapt to it and adjust to it. So yeah. And one of the things I found out that really increased my skill level is practicing your DPS rotation. So on mobs or on the practice dummy, understanding your DPS rotation, and that there's not just one set of a DPS rotation. It changes from fight to fight depending on if it's a melee friendly fight, if it's a range friendly fight. It comes down to where you can position, where you can be within a fight, and also if there's interrupts available. So if you want to save your gadget and your stance to burn it when the mob gets interrupted, and that way you can do the most amount of damage possible. Or if there is no interrupt phase, you have to really use your stance and your gadget effectively throughout the entire fight. And understanding these DPS rotations and when to use certain rotations and understanding the efficiency of your rotations really is what increases the damage output, because you're using things so well and it's so synergized that you're usually not wasting 2 to 3 seconds not pressing anything or waiting for a specific cooldown. So one of the things I want to start off talking about is understanding your cooldowns and how things work. For example, if you have an ability that resets, usually you want to spam the living crap out of that ability if it's a resettable ability. For example, my Breaching Strike in my Rampage, because my Breaching Strike resets 20% chance at the time, just with my Relentless Strike, and Breaching Strike has a 30% chance to reset after using it. Stuff like this can, just knowing this and tearing it out to that, really increases your DPS, especially if you understand how to use it and how many times that reset really procs. So that's one way you can increase your DPS very effectively. But another way you can increase your DPS, and let me get a fight that better shows configure port. Did I change the mob again? Did I change to past fight? Oh, that's right. There we go. Collective fire, player damage. Let's go to Bodafet, and just all my damage. So yeah, in this fight you can see I had 454 cast. So pretty much when I press the ability, it's cast count, and it just shows you you did 454 casts in that fight. So the two things, if you do have Galaxy Meter, the best correlation that you want to see is your cast count and your deflex. As you can see, out of 454 cast counts, only 8 of those abilities were deflects, so that's below 2% of the overall damage was deflected. Now that's very, very good. Now if you're seeing your deflects are up, for example, if you're being deflected like 5% of your overall damage, well, every single amount that you lower that deflex, you're increasing your damage by that percentage. So if you really want a 5% increase and you're noticing that 10% of all of your attacks are being deflected, maybe raise your strike through to the point where only 1% of your overall damage being deflected, and that way you just theoretically increase your DPS by 9%. Now that's a very good stat correlation to really follow and understand. But another one that's really good to follow and understand is your crit. So for example, if you see the crit damage, 37% of my damage was crit based, and you can see the count, 105 strikes of my 454 crits, and that's really, really, really good. Yeah, so 37% of my overall damage was crit, and 23%, as you can see right below it, is how many times of my casts were crit casts, if you understand what I'm talking about. So like looking at this really can help you adjust your stats. So say you need a little bit more crit, and that way you'll understand what needs to be adjusted. So for example, if you're getting a shit ton of deflex, there's a strike through problem. So either someone has to run, for example, I'm a warrior that runs overwhelming presence, so everybody gets that 6% increase to that 6% deflect chance, reduced deflect chance on the mob. So pretty much it's a 6% strike through increase. And having stuff like that can really cut down your deflects and really increase your overall damage. And having somebody in your raid run, I believe it's the medic that runs the crit aura, that can increase your crit. So instead of you critting 25% of your overall damage as crit, it jumps up to 37% of your overall damage as crit. And that's really, really good, because that's increasing your overall damage by roughly 10%. Say about a good 5 or 8%. I'm just thinking about numbers here. And understanding these stats and learning how you can adjust them. For example, stat wise, like number stats right here, or performance wise, you playing and understanding rotations, all takes effect. And I'll give you a good example about understanding rotations. I used to run SmackDown, and I'm one of those guys that I like to know if it's worthwhile to run a certain buff or not. And honestly, it's not worthwhile to run SmackDown because the amount of damage that I was increasing was so minuscule that if I just took it off and just increased my own DPS, I'd be doing more DPS than what everybody would be increased by, which is retarded because there's some weird thing. I believe, for example, I'm also running Armor Shred, and I believe if I'm running Armor Shred and I use SmackDown, the SmackDown expose actually has a diminishing rate because it should be doing a lot more than it's like damage wise as a whole, but it's really not. Like as soon as I got rid of SmackDown, uh, I just started really following the DPS, and the difference was pretty much non-existent whatsoever. And that's the best way to track that is by looking at your overall DPS. And when I took away SmackDown, our overall DPS was actually higher because I was putting out better numbers. So that's other things you really gotta look for is like, is there ability that you should not be using? Because SmackDown as a warrior really hurts your DPS. Really hurts. It's more of like benefit each. It's more like a benefit everybody else. Uh, not really benefits you. That's what type of ability it is. So yeah, so pretty much looking at these stats will really help you increase your DPS. So yeah, going on about uh, looking at more your crit and strike through here and understanding the correlations between certain stats. Uh, talk about like this is the your assault power, your strike through and your critical hit chance when you're building out your gear. It's kind of like the baseline of your DPS. Rune slots, dedicating your rune slots to increase your DPS. It's really needed. Like you should invest in your rune slots before you even start caring about your DPS. Because if you're complaining that you're pulling low DPS and you have like 3 of your rune slots filled and you have like 8 of them not, well, there's your problem right there. You got to fill out your rune slots, and that could require you to hunt gear through the market or ask somebody to make gear with specific rune slots for you. And if you're going to make the gear, it's RNG. If you go through the market, you're competing against everybody else. So really, it takes a lot of time and commitment and a lot of freaking plat. Oh boy, don't even get me started. So yeah, that's one of the things that can really increase your DPS for sure is gear hunting and getting the most ideal runes and stats. Another thing I really want to talk about is food and buffs. It's very important for you to have food because you can get free brutality. For example, I got 67 brutality right here. And boosts, this gives me 61 brutality. It's free brutality, and it furthermore increases your DPS, which is very handy. Getting gadgets like I have myself for about 10 seconds, my assault power increases by 383, and my next attack is 100% chance to critical hit, which is kind of nice. Do I really need that 100% guaranteed for my next attack? Not really, but it's nice to have, especially if you're running power hitter, because that's one less stack that you have to worry about. So yeah, just understanding rotation, gearing out, stats that you can see to really help fine tune yourself, having really good confidence in a fight and understanding the fight, as well as just having really good group synergy. Like if you have very good group synergy and everybody can communicate, it will save you from a lot of wipes, and it also will help you with your positioning. Because when, for example, you're doing Collective of Fire and you have your tank and healers on the north side and your DPS on the south side, it's very easy to manage eggs and really easy to manage the people that have dots. So if you have a dot and you're doing, because you are in an egg, you go into the north side where all the healers are, and the DPS in that fight should really not take any damage, unless if you get the the circle thing. I forget what it's called. That's circle damage, but it's so easy to dodge. If you guys look at my last video that I just posted, I pretty much dodge everything. So yeah, I don't want to bore you guys to death, but that's some tips that you can see to increase your DPS through abilities and just looking at deeper stats, so you can change your stats and see how you can kind of work it out with your raid, with auras and stuff, other benefits from amps. So yeah, once again, it's DPS Bodafet. Glad you guys stuck all the way through this and just learn how to increase your DPS, because these are things that will do it. So once again, it's DPS Bodafet signing out.